Yeah, very good, very warm welcome to everybody. Again, a special welcome to Alan Heeks. Give us a wave, Alan, because there's quite a bit of a wall of faces on there. What's it? Uh, whose article triggered this conversation. When I first read it, I thought this is it's good. It's an interesting thing for an article, but it's an especially interesting thing and a valuable thing to talk about because we're having to kind of negotiate a turn in the road, I think, as a society. And I thought there's plenty to discuss, plenty to explore in terms of our own kind of vocation, really, as individuals, but also as people in community. None of us is an individual, of course, on our own entirely, anyway. But also hello to Jonathan, because I thought it would be useful to have someone who's got lived experience in perhaps a more intense way of living in community. And I'm really delighted that Jonathan's joining us from down in Hilfield, lives at the Friary there. Thank you, Jonathan. Just to share a little bit of quite a lot of experience, not just at Hilfield, but of the Pilsen community. I don't know, when did you join there at Pilsen, Jonathan? How long ago was that?
1996.
Right, so you had a good, how many, 15 years there?
13 years there, and I've been at
13.
Hilfield 16. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. So, and welcome to everybody else. If you've just joined, we are recording this because it will be a conversation I think that we'll continue to draw on. And one of the reasons for that, I think, is over the last few years, Green Christian, as I say, has taken a bit of a turn in the road. Yes, we're continuing to campaign for kind of protection of the environment, for reduction in carbon emissions, for protection of biodiversity and all of that. But things have got to the point where we realize that, there has to be talk of the possibility of some kind of environmental collapse, preparation for that, or at least an awareness of what the consequences would be if that were to happen. And on the principle that actually understanding that that is a possibility, and that's the ultimate kind of destination that we're heading to, unless we change course. It's about thinking about, well, how do we build more connective, more resilient, and more relational communities amongst ourselves, both within Green Christian, but empower you as individuals in your local areas, in your congregations, if you have one, in your whatever circles that you might move in, to strengthen the human bonds of friendship and mutuality. So we're in for an interesting discussion, and I hope you've had a chance to read a little bit of Alan's article that was in the very freshly printed Green Christian magazine. But Alan's hopefully going to just sort of run us through the key points of it. Let me just start by, not with a prayer, but a reading. This is will be familiar from Acts 4, and this is possibly the template for any endeavor to connect with each other as believers in community. This is the first Jerusalem community of disciples. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. I think there's a real invitation there for us to go above and beyond a lot of the worthwhile and necessary talk about building community development for resilience in our times. But I think, as we see there, there's something in the life of the spirit that draws us into that deeper fellowship. So as we go through, please feel free to put questions in the chat. That will be probably the main source of sort of discussion, conversation, if you like, when Alan and Jonathan have contributed. But if that's difficult for you in any way, just raise a hand, electronic or fleshly, and ask the question in person. That would be fine as well. So perhaps to Alan then first. You've written the article on pages 16 and 17 of our latest edition. What was it that motivated you to do that? Why did you do that? And what was the purpose behind the words that you were conveying there?
It was really, I was living with a lot of internal pressures and questions around community and spirituality, and I thought I need to find a way of expressing this and sharing it and exploring it with other people. It might be worth saying briefly what my story is around community and spirituality. I had a real turning point 35 years ago in 1990 when I first went to the Findhorn Foundation in Scotland. And it was the first, although I'd been to various things that call themselves spiritual communities, Findhorn was the first place I went to where I actually experienced a spiritual community that I felt was actually functioning, was to a fair extent walking its talk, and was also an eco-village. So it was very much about spirituality and ecology. And although my path is Christian, one of the things I valued about Findhorn was that for them, their central spiritual practice was shared silence and contact with nature. So it was a very inclusive approach, and I found that really helpful. So a bit later, one of my main adventures in spirituality community, also inspired by Findhorn, in 2003, was that I started a co-housing community that had a spiritual basis. So co-housing is, I think, a very interesting form of community in which individuals, couples, families will have their own front door and their own private living space, but alongside that you have shared facilities. And so what 6 of us set up, and it's still going strong 20 years later, is a place called the Threshold Centre in North Dorset, where we had our own individual cottages, flats, 1-bedroom apartments, whatever. But we also had a meditation room where we share. We had a large room where we could have shared meals, and we had a market garden. We had car sharing. So it was very environmentally sustainable as well as humanly sustainable. And I lived there for 5 years. So that's my biggest experience of actually living in community. Alongside all that, my work has been quite deeply involved with sustainability and the environment for over 20 years. And all of that cranked up for me, as probably for many of us, probably around 2019, the time of Greta Thunberg, Jem Bendler deep adaptation, and the realization that actually we're past the point where we can hope to solve the climate crisis. We're in it and it'll be with us for the rest of our lives. It's really an issue of how much worse it gets. And I'm very much in the same place as you, Paul. I've resisted using the word collapse for a long time, but we had to face the fact that at least partial collapses of not only the ecosystems, but of things like food supplies, particularly in the way I look at things, that there are some big threats around us. And really from early on in my exploration, I've had the feeling that communities were absolutely crucial to this. That what we're facing into is beyond the capacity of individuals or nuclear households to cope with. And it's also going to be beyond the capacity of government, whether you're talking about local authorities or national government, to cope with. It's got to be local communities. So I've been exploring that increasingly over the last sort of 4 or 5 years. And the teachers who've inspired me the most, and I'm thinking about people like Thomas Berry as one of the deepest inspirations for me. Also people like Cynthia Bourgeot, and also Rupert Reed, who many of you may know of as the prime mover in the climate majority project. What's not visible from that is that Rupert is actually really passionate about the importance of what he and I would call spiritual resilience, but he doesn't want to sort of put that in the public face of the climate majority project, but he acknowledges that it is crucial. So, as I said in the article, what I've been exploring really actively in the last sort of 6 or 9 months is what could be done tangibly to try and take forward this idea of spiritual resilience. And the other part of my story is that I have set up 2 environmental education charities, which have both created residential centres. One's an organic farm for young people. The other's a woodland retreat centre called Hazel Hill Wood near Salisbury. And I've retired from both of those. But what they showed me is the power of place. You know, at a time when a lot of our lives are becoming increasingly virtual, my sense is that in order to explore spiritual resilience, you need to be together face to face, and you also need to be in a place where you can have deep contact with the land. So you can probably see that this derives somewhat from Findhorn, that sense of shared silence and contact with the land, and particularly growing your own food. And you know, I'm a big follower of biodynamic market gardening, which to me is probably the only spiritually oriented form of cultivating food that I'm aware of. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of how these things tie together. I think just to give people on this call a little bit more of an idea of where we're at. So I've got 2 main people I'm working with currently. Our vision is to create a small, what we would call spiritual community and education centre, probably in mid-Wales. I live on the Welsh borders, and the reason we're drawn to Wales is that it's the least populated part of the UK apart from the Welsh Highlands, mid-Wales. So there is a sense of spaciousness about it, of being able to get out from under some of the sort of craziness and clutter of you know, modern so-called civilization. And also that all 3 of us have a strong interest in, you know, Celtic Christianity, and the roots of that are quite strong in mid-Wales, and they're relatively accessible. What we're aware of is that in order to create a community, we're going to need more than the couple of people we've got now. You know, I'm semi-retired. I'm not going to be living in this place. I'm more in the role of Moses, hopefully leading people to the promised land. So part of the reason for wanting to do this call is both to explore the issues, but also to see if anyone on this call or any of your contacts is interested in joining the adventure. And I think just to wrap up, just to highlight a couple of the dilemmas that we see in this. One is about what I call the S word. One of the things that has really pained me in the last few years is realizing that a lot of people, and particularly young people, are quite allergic to the word spiritual. I think they conflate it with religious, with hierarchy, with dogma, with some of the problems they see in the established church. So there's a real issue here about language. Even words like spiritual are difficult. I think Christian has the same issues sometimes. So the people most deeply involved with this all share a Christian path, but all share a real question about the pros and cons of being explicitly Christian in what we offer, as opposed to being inclusive in some way where people of any faith and many people of no faith feel welcome and can join us. So that's one of the big issues, is about how we create the right language for this. And so although monasteries have been a big inspiration in my path, particularly Hilfield. So Jonathan and I know each other quite well. I used to live down the road from Hilfield. He and I ran a couple of workshops at Hilfield, including a few Green Christian members. I've stopped using the word monastery for what we are trying to create in mid-Wales, because I think for most people the word monastery suggests that you take vows, that it's a cloistered place where there's relatively limited movement in and out, and where there's a very defined hierarchy, where there's a rule or an order. And we are still working out what we would want to offer, but our sense at the moment is that it's unlikely to be monastic in that strict sense of the word. So hopefully that gives you enough of the context for the article, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation this evening. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks very much, Alan. That's given us a lot to think about, and I think I can see a lot of overlap already with certainly my aspirations in life, but also maybe Jonathan, you've got there is echoes there of life at Hillfield and at Pilsen before that. You know, I was thinking, for instance, particularly about you mentioned, Alan, the power of place as being, you know, places being as the factor that unites people, and in your experience, and I know this is the case at Hillfield, it's the growing of food that's very much part of the kind of glue that brings the community together, um, and the fact that you've got a kind of physical co-housing going on. In effect, you know, it's had monastic roots, but one of the puzzles of residential community living is how it starts, isn't it, and how it's financed. I'll turn to you, Jonathan, just to sort of respond to anything that really resonates for you in what Alan said, and any advice that you have, not just for Alan, but for any of us who are tickled by what Alan said.
Yes, just to say, I had a very interesting meeting with Rupert Reed. We were both in this Sunday morning light program. We had to appear and got to speak for 2 minutes each. I was defending Just Stop Oil and disruption. He was giving another side to things. And I didn't know who I was going to be on with. They just told me it would be somebody else from the other side. So I was fearing somebody from the far right, you know, from campaigning against net zero. And so I was braced for that. But they literally kept us apart pre the talk. Then we sat down together and said, "Yeah, you're Rupert Reed, aren't you?" And we disagreed a little bit about tactics, but unfortunately for the viewers, there was lots of common ground there.
Yeah.
I think, Alan, contact with the land is really, really important, has become increasingly so to me. Before I moved to Pilsden 30 years ago, I terribly interested in community, involved with community associations, community protest, establishing community gardens, community banks, credit unions, did a lot of community arts work. But and I went to Pilsen because I was interested in living in community. I wasn't interested in living in the countryside. I'd have preferred an urban existence, really. But then the kind of magic of the land began to fill me, really, and absorb me, and it's quite remarkable well, we know it, don't we? Whenever we spend time outdoors, unless it's terribly cold, we always feel better for it, don't we? And one of the attractions to me about community, I have to admit, I am a rebel at heart, is that it's profoundly countercultural. Well, counter our modern Western culture of hyper-individualism. Of course, the most sustainable cultures that continue to exist and run for thousands of years are the cultures of indigenous people who live profoundly in community. They don't think about living in community. That's just the way they are. It's just in community with each other, and of course in community with the land they're totally part of. And that's something that really began to dawn on me more and more the longer I spent at Pilsden, the importance of place. And the thought of leaving the people when I decided to leave Pilsden was terrible, but the grief was almost greater, leaving, you know, the familiar vegetable garden, the trees, the hills. At at Hilfield, I'll just describe the community very briefly, really. It's a community of 25, roughly 25 people. It's elastic. It's always growing and expanding, partly to do with we have, 20, 30 guests each week coming in, and, the table expands for people. Then come on Monday, which is our Sabbath, the table contracts a bit. And it's a community where people go out, and which is very much a Franciscan way. And there are 25 of us, 4 Franciscan friars, 3 married couples, 6 children, and 7 or 8 single people at any one time, and often people from other parts of the world, which really enriches us. Mixture of, we've got 2 non-binary people, we've got several gay people, we've got 1 or 2 theologically conservative people as well. We're looking forward to having a Quaker joining us. So there's a diversity in community, which I think is really important. And we've just had a wonderful weekend called I think we called it the Repair Workshop. We're inspired by St. Francis, whose one of his calls to conversion was Jesus speaking to him from the San Damiano cross, saying, "Repair my church." And he, of course, took it literally at first and started rebuilding the church. But community is really a place of repair, a repair for people who feel broken by life. There's a lovely line in R.S. Thomas's poem, The Kingdom. It goes something like this, where industry is a place for the healing of minds and bodies sort of broken by life. So community is a place of repair. It can give people resilience. It can give people inspiration, hope. Of course, it's deeply challenging, particularly if you're living with, we all eat together, we all work together, and that can be tough. And if you're not really honest with one another and don't embrace the gift of humility, recognizing your own, if somebody's upsetting you a lot, there's probably a lot of projection going on. So yeah, it can be a place of great learning. But communities are resilient. I find that really in the way people come and go. There's I think only 4 of us who've been there for more than 10 years now. And 2 years ago, apart from the 4 or 5 of us, it was a completely different makeup of people. But one of the things that gives community resilience is our vision, a vision to follow in the way of St. Francis. And of course, St. Francis was trying to live as Jesus had, as the early church did, holding all things in common, as you reminded us, Paul. Communities are, that resilience, as Alan was alluding to, is really important. I read something today, was it today or a couple of days ago, on Richard Rohr's daily meditation. I always say Benedict is one of the great inspirations for community life, because of course he wrote his rule, and boundaries are something that's just terribly important in community. When I say boundaries, I mean the daily rhythms of life, which we have at Pilsden, with the daily prayers, the daily meals, a daily meeting, a monthly meeting, of course the pattern of the church's year. And without that rule, those patterns to hold us, things can quickly form apart. And Alistair MacIntyre wrote back in the 70s his book After Virtue, saying what's needed is a new St. Benedict. And something similar I heard read today or yesterday from Acevedo Butcher. And he writes this: Benedict's monasteries were the bomb shelters, time capsules, laboratories, and protected cultivators of the contemplative tradition in a world falling apart. And kind of that's what's happening now. I think we need places to teach us how to remind us how to live well with one another and live peaceably. Places of repair, places of healing, places that teach us, good patterns, places of mercy, that teach humility, that teach living simply, because we're going to have to live much more simply and collectively with dwindling resources. But of course, my experience living in community is that I've never really been in want. There's always enough if you share it. That's probably enough from me.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, thank you. By all means, everyone put questions and comments in chat. I know there's a few already, and I'll try and pick up on those as well. One of the things that's occurred to me in what you were saying, Jonathan, that came also out of Alan's contribution was stability. That the place lends the stability that perhaps the community doesn't have. So you talked about feeling grief at leaving Pilsden, more about the land and the garden and things like that, things that were more permanent than the people. And it reminds me of the distinction between the Benedictine and the mendicant traditions in monasticism, where the Benedictine vow is also to stability. Now, there's something about stability which is particularly needed in the dangerous times that we're now moving into, and I guess a lot of us maybe, and some of us in practice are drawn to or inhabit the kind of mendicant tradition, Franciscan, Dominican, Augustinian, whatever, from the friar tradition, if you like. People out on the road doing stuff, but actually this conversation seems to be very much about stability, recovering monastic stability, but perhaps without the M word attached to it. But I want to pick up on Jim's question. So thank you, Jim. You asked if there's space for community for those of us who are not able to access the physical community, and I think that's something that I'd like to move on to exploring in a moment, because it's great that places like Hilfield exist, that Findhorn exists, or did exist. It's changed, as thank you, Liz, for the news on that. But we don't all have access to such sort of treasure houses of resilience and community. So how do we find that if we're in sort of just in a if we run a family, if we've got a job, and all the other commitments of everyday life? We'll come on to that, but I'll just pick up on any other. So yeah, John's asking, could Jonathan pick up on how important he feels the rules and Franciscan tradition, guardian and rhythms of shared worship in holding Hilfield Friary together, given Alan's comments? So I'll just run through a few of the questions, and then there might be things that you want to pick up on, but we'll perhaps come back to them later as well. So that's about the centrality of worship, perhaps in which may be something that's a bit more tricky in the kind of scenario that Alan's envisaging, where a shared narrative and a shared language of liturgy, for instance, is going to be perhaps almost impossible to reach. I wonder, perhaps you could just address, Jonathan, how that's done at Hilfield, given that you've got quite a heterogeneous community, how do people actually pull together, and what role does the liturgy play in that that's celebrated in the chapel? And is there anything, Alan, that you'd want to come in on there as well?
In the chapel, we have 4 daily offices, and the brothers are, it's part of their, their vows to go every day, every time. Other of us have our own rule of life, so I'll go twice a day, and others might go once a week. Everybody is asked to come to the whether they're Christian or not. We have 1 or 2 from time to time, non-Christians or people of other faith traditions, and everybody's invited to come to expected to come to the Sunday Eucharist. But the fact that the prayer is going on, bells ring all the time there's that kind of reminder of the prayer. We stop work at 10 to 12 for the prayers, for the midday Eucharist. So it goes on. In the evening, we'll have a reading after supper and a prayer then. We'll have grace before lunch and supper, which can take many forms. And what's wonderful is for me, is the integration of work, worship, and eating together, and the welcome of our many visitors. So, you'll be working out, mucking out the cows. You take your wellies off outside the chapel, go into the chapel, come out of the chapel, then go into lunch, probably washing your hands at some point in between. So there's that kind of that connection that's there. And I suppose there's something quite sacramental about the presence of the brothers who certainly wear their habits for worship and at meal times. Something really quite important about that. I don't quite exactly know what it is, but it's certainly a great inspiration to a lot of people.
It's part of the. I mean, it's not just part. It is the identity of the place, isn't it? It's a friary after all. But Alan, you've obviously wrestled quite hard with this question of how confessing, if you like, communities should be for those of us that are motivated by faith in building community. I share your wariness about wearing my faith on my sleeve, partly because I know how terrible Christians can be to each other and to other people. So given that, Jonathan's got it easy, hasn't he? Because he's living in a friary. How do you feel we should handle that?
Well, it's very evocative because, when I was living near Hilfield, I used to go there regularly. I'd volunteer for a day a month in the market garden. And I think the way Jonathan puts it, there is something sacramental about the rhythm of the services, and the presence of the brothers is absolutely true. This is going to be very much an experiment, and it's going to depend on the people who are there shaping it. But at the moment, the way I would imagine it is that we would have a shared silent meditation at least a couple of times a day. At Findhorn, certainly when I was there, when it was still running as a full-on spiritual community, there would be a shared silent meditation that many of the community would go to in the morning before work, just before lunch, and in the evening. So you can weave that in, and I think that weaving meditation with working together and eating together will have quite a powerful quality of community. The other thing I would like to pick up on is Jim's question about how to access community where we are. The reason I called my article talked about leaven for our communities is that I think it's simply not going to be realistic to try and turn your local neighbourhood into a neighbourhood that has shared spiritual values. As I've thought about it, and the way that I try and put that into embodiment in my community is to use language that is not overtly spiritual. So talk about what's our shared vision for this neighbourhood? How are we going to support each other as we come under increasing stress? So it's using words that are not spiritually loaded and are as inclusive as possible. And my belief is that if you've got a small number of people who are coming from a place of service and of spiritual commitment, almost like a rule, a rule in the sense that they are really, committing themselves to a path of spiritual service. If those people approach a lay community, a lay neighborhood in the right way, they can really bring that quality of spirituality into it. They can suffuse it. They can be the leaven for it. I think that's quite a subtle process. And so when I was talking about the power of place, as Jonathan was, for me, what that would be is a place that would be a catalyst to help people to learn those skills, create a support network that would enable them to go back into the community where they live, where they're surrounded mostly by people who don't explicitly share those values.
I think
Sorry, go.
just
Yeah,
to
go on,
add
Jonathan.
to that, Alan, really, some pattern of shared silence, I think, is really important. Some shared work and eating together, vital, I think, for any way of building community. And embracing difference. Everybody likes to talk about food, don't they? And pretty much everybody likes to eat.
Yeah. Can I just pick up on another point that, well, Alan, you described how you had spent time in a co-housing project. Judith asked, can co-housing or intentional communities accommodate and care for those of us who will become old and frail, which I don't think any of us is exempt from that, and in need of care that is less and less and at increasing cost being provided by the state. Two other people liked that comment. So perhaps you could just tell us a bit more about co-housing and perhaps this has been quite a practical topic, really. How co-housing offers itself as a model for intentional community, in your experience, and perhaps a little bit about how it relates to what you're planning in Mid Wales, and how it differs. And Jonathan, you may have some sort of observations from a different kind of setup when Alan's spoken.
Yeah. So I was quite deeply involved in co-housing. Not only, I've actually set up 2 co-housing neighbourhoods, the Threshold Centre, which was a small pilot group, and then I went on and set up the Bridport co-housing community, which is actually the largest affordable co-housing community in the UK. One of the interesting things about co-housing is that it can take a lot of different forms. So, for example, in America, where it's now quite well developed, there's a whole subset called senior co-housing. So there are ways in which you can actually tune a co-housing neighbourhood to the needs of people as they age. For example, by having accommodation for carers to live on site, obviously making, like you'd have raised beds so that the market garden is usable by older people and so on. So there's a variety of ways in which you can tailor co-housing. I think the Threshold Centre is interesting for this group because I think it's one of the very few co-housing communities I know of that is particularly focused on having a shared spiritual thread as part of the glue for its community. And I said that was the visible part of that was that we had a meditation room and people were invited to join for a silent meditation of 25 minutes each morning. But I think back to what Jonathan was saying, I mean, one of the key things about almost all co-housing is that you share meals a few times a week. So that sense of breaking bread together and also that you have time to share how you are, give each other mutual support, and that you're to some extent working together. So typically people will be required to put in maybe sort of 6 to 12 hours a week of unpaid time for the community. So they might be working in the market garden or cooking a shared meal or, dealing with administration and so on. So I think it has a lot of appeal. but I can also tell you that it's extremely difficult to do in the UK. The way that the UK property market is set up makes it horrific. And in other countries, there are what you might call professional partners, people like housing associations or ethical housing developers who will work with the group. So they will step in and they'll put the capital down to buy the site. They'll fund the development and then hand it back to the resident group. And that pretty much hardly exists in the UK. In terms of what we're hoping to create in Wales, we are picturing this as being on the co-housing model. So, having looked at a lot of other places where you're living communally, places like Monkton Ward, for example, or Athona, or indeed Hilfield, my experience is that most of those places, people find it quite hard to sustain their presence there for more than a couple of years. It's just too emotionally intense. There's a lack of privacy. So with what we're trying to do, we envisage it being on a co-housing model where people do have their own front door, they're cooking for themselves some of the time, and they're sharing meals and they're welcoming guests for some of the time as well. Hopefully that gives you enough, but I'm happy to sort of, answer other questions as we go on, Paul.
Thank you. Yeah. I'm just mindful of the time. So, what, Jonathan, did you want to come in there at all? And we'll.
No, nothing too much more to add. But
Okay.
I like that question about hierarchies and charismatic leaders. Often communities are founded by a charismatic leader. Certainly Pilsden was. And then when the leader dies or goes or leaves under some great scandal, which charismatic leaders can be very subject to, then what's left? If the community has to have, solid foundations. It has to have a rule, a strong vision, and if it has that, I think it can carry on, and good patterns, good healthy patterns of worship, of welcoming people. So the more it's been interesting at Hilfield, we the Franciscans call the community leader the guardian, which is very different to the Benedictine model, which is an abbot. So the guardian is really just there to keep people safe. That's how I see it, by protecting the kind of, the rhythms of healthy rhythms of life, and helping people in the community to build trust within the group, and make it a safe, rich place for people to visit. So I think community works best when there's a flatter system of leadership, to me, but most of all, where a community can work well still with a boss leader, as long as responsibility is shared. If the responsibility isn't shared, then the community becomes vulnerable to the leader leaving, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. And when there's property involved, that's actually can be quite a tricky situation, can't it? Quite a costly situation for depending on the kind of financial structure of the place. We will break up into little groups of 4 or so in a moment, but I'm just conscious that we've talked very much about built environment and infrastructure. There is another end of the spectrum, which is the kind of dispersed intentional communities, virtual, if you like. And just as one example, I wonder if George would like to take a moment to tell us what I guess many people will already know about the way of life community in Green Christian. There are other alternatives, so there's Third Order Franciscans represented here, for instance. By all means, shout if there's another kind of intentional, dispersed, virtual community that you belong to, if you're in the audience. But George, would you like just to say a little bit about how the way of life that Green Christian has set up sort of envisages itself?
Sure. Thanks very much, Paul. It's been a fascinating discussion. I'm really enjoying it. And I just mentioned before I talk about the way of life, Alan, by coincidence or something else possibly, about a week ago I was looking through my old magazine, my old permaculture magazine articles, and I came across you from your time, winter 2019, when they visited Hazel Hill Wood, and I was fascinated. And then a week later I received the magazine. Maybe there's something going on there, I don't know. But anyway, about 8 years ago, a number of us were within Green Systems were considering the possibility of exploring the idea of having some sort of community, a way of life or a rule of life. This was quite different from what we had been doing, where basically we campaign, we provide resources for people, we pray, we do all of those things, but was there a need for something a little bit more forward, if you like, for people who feel they would benefit from following a way of life. And interestingly, I think that the idea for this really came from something, Paul, that you wrote in the magazine. We were talking about the possibility of a community. This is going back to 9 years ago. And then that kicked, you may not remember that, but that kicked off a discussion about how we might do these things in relation to other intentional communities, spiritual communities. So we decided to set up a way of life. And that's based on 4 elements. Many of you here will be aware of it. It's based on the elements of prayer, daily prayer, living gently on the earth, and that could be in all sorts of different things for different people. As can public witness and campaigning, and finally encouragement. I love the idea of those 4 elements being kind of bookended by prayer and encouragement. And that's what we're doing. I guess in terms of numbers, we have about 100 people, maybe just a little less than 100 people, companions and explorers in the Green Christian Way of Life, who are now in about 10 regions up and down the country. Some of them more active than others, certainly. We also send out not newsletters, but we have about 15 authors that who are companions who tell their stories, what's been happening to them in terms of their way of life. They're not newsletters. So we have a number of things we do. We send out monthly letters. We have bi-monthly gatherings in Zoom. We have an annual meeting as well. And we have the regional groups. That's how it kind of works. Those people who really feel the need, and I include me in that, to have a kind of structure to follow, then they are companions if they are dedicating themselves to that. If they're interested in the way of life, we call them explorers, and I know we're all exploring from a different definition, I guess. I'll just sort of talk about one other thing, if I just may. Since we're talking about spiritual communities, did quite a lot of research in the last few years into new monasticism, and I live in Penzance, which is quite a remote part of the country. Has a strong sense of Celtic Christianity, and we are still attempting to set up a dispersed community. We thought it was going to be an actual residential community with an old vicarage being used, but that's not going to happen anymore. The charism, if you like, the reason behind setting this up was the stresses and strains that are going on for people who work in charities and who are teachers and who work in the NHS and so on and so forth. And the residential community would have some residents living there, not many, but there would be a place for people to come, to be quiet, actually, who we would pray for if we wished to pray for them. That's now not happening, but what we're now calling the Anchorage community is going to be a dispersed community across West Cornwall, and it will mix the various parishes. together. But we get lots also of visitors down here, and we get lots of people to our church who come from all over the world. So we had actually envisaged this dispersed community actually having membership not only in Cornwall but, or in the UK, but overseas as well. So that's kind of where we are at the moment. The way of life, I think, is the elements of the way of life, prayer, living gently, campaigning, and encouragement has become gradually part of what Green Christian do and how Green Christian does things as a whole. And I think that's been a great outcome, perhaps an unexpected outcome of what we've been doing. But yeah, that's where we are.
Thanks. Thank you, George. At some point, maybe we'll pick up on that word charism that you use, because I think that's quite an important one for any community, dispersed or residential. But let's take a little breather, if you like, and meet in small groups. There's plenty. You've heard a lot. I've certainly picked up a lot of fresh ideas, and we've been Barbara or Catherine. I think Catherine, thank you, has put us into groups of 4. We'll take just 10 minutes just to reflect, and I'll post a question in the chat for you, which you can take away with you. What kinds of intentional community are needed to respond to the needs of our times now? Well, not just now, but in the future, because, you know, Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither was an intentional community. So if you think ahead to what the world will be like in 10, 15, 20 years' time, as well as of now, what kinds of intentional community are needed? What part might you be playing in that? And how in practice might that model that you agree on, if you do agree, be created? What's required? How would you do it? How would you go about it? So let's come back in 10 minutes. There'll still be time, and we'll have another 10 or 15 minutes after that to kind of exchange ideas and conclusions, and for sort of any last minute questions. But yeah, see what you make of that anyway. 10 minutes, not long, but see you in 10 minutes time. Welcome back, everyone. There's by all means, if you have anything you want to sort of, you know, a thought that you want to share, you can put it in the chat, or actually put a hand up. I think it's over to you, really. If you want to ask a question, offer a reflection, say something, something that you've learned, or you know, a debate that you want to kick up, then now's the time to do it. Any thoughts from your breakout rooms? Any conclusions that you came to? Richard. Hello, Richard.
Hello, Paul.
Go on.
Well, others in the group can correct me if I'm wrong, but we didn't come to a solution to the problem so that we could save the world within the space that was allotted for the breakout group. But what we did, I think was that various things can be tried. People just need to get on with things and see what works, I suppose. But the link with the land and bringing people together around growing things seemed a recurrent theme.
Thanks. Just as a little bit of, I wanted to be a little bit provocative. Listening, hearing the story, and having been to Hilfield particularly, I wonder, you know, is it possible for everybody to have that kind of lifestyle when we have a country of 67 million people as it is now? Is that really just an expression of privilege? I don't know who I'm asking that to, really, but maybe, yeah.
You're asking that to me, I think, Paul, because I was.
Oh, shall I ask you, Mark? Go on then.
Yeah. I just coincidentally last month, as Catherine probably know, I put a question on the C-Link about how much wealth secures privacy, and that was sparked off by these 2 books here.
Who owns England? And The Poor Had No Lawyers.
Who owns Scotland? And I think that feeds into the fact that because things are so inequitable, that really puts that question that you posed into context. And we probably need to relook at the way private property and land ownership is structured in the whole of the UK. It seems to be way behind a much more coming out of almost a feudalist system that has changed in Europe and other parts of the world, but has been very slow to change here. And I think when you look at large conurbations, trying to match those into an intentional community, it's hard to see how that can be done without a fair bit of redistribution or reinstitution of real equity. That's the only way you can get your Acts chapter 2 scenario to really bed in. We were talking in our breakout group about Jubilee Farm that I'm involved in Northern Ireland here, a small Christian community farm which is trying to grow some food and bring in asylum seekers and teach them farming skills and do a wee bit of education for the local schools on land and biodiversity and conservation. So we're trying to do a lot of different things. In the current economic model, it doesn't pay financially. We are struggling in monetary terms, but still doing a lot of good work on a model that I think could be expanded around conurbations and towns if there was a little bit of land, because we've only got 13 acres. I don't know what size Hilfield and Pilston were on acreage terms, but I'm frustrated in the fact that we're at the regenerative farming end of the spectrum in Northern Ireland, trying to do the right thing for the future, to have a future in 10 years' time, as you posed the question, and yet Northern Ireland, the rest of the agriculture is intensive and polluting and destroying the environment, and we're going in the wrong direction. So we need a huge change in mindset of both the farming community, but particularly the whole population, to really answer that question that you posed.
Yeah. Jonathan or Alan, do you want to come back in this?
I think the church could set an example on this. There's a great campaign now called Wildcard, which is encouraging the Church of England to rewild 30% of its land, and the Church of England owns, I think it's 1% of the land in this country. So the church could be setting an example, both in terms of in terms of protecting nature through rewilding, but also in the way a lot of the land that's rented out to farming, it's nearly all industrial farming, which often isn't the most productive way of growing food, I don't think. So we need a big shift, and it would be great if the church could be at the forefront of that and setting an example and saying, yeah, this regenerative farming is viable. It's better for the land long term, and it's profitable too.
Yes, I would agree with that. That's exactly what we've done at Jubilee Farm. We've set aside 30% of the land, even though we've only got 13 acres, a third of it is left untouched for biodiversity. And we have seen an increase in the insect and bird life population on the farm because we've done that. So that's the way forward, I think, yes.
Did you, Mark, you had your hand up before I picked on you to
No,
to comment. Did you have
what I wanted to say. You just segued into that beautifully. Well done.
Good. Well, all right. Offered you the segue. That's good. Sandra. Hello, Sandra.
Well, as I explained to my group, this weekend I'm attending a weekend gathering of the ashram community and what remains of it. It was founded by John Vincent, who is still alive but very frail, in his 90s. There were community houses, but we are actually in the process of selling all the buildings and using the money to support groups to which we are affiliated and or want to support in different ways. But actually, with the group I meet online, we've got to know each other, and there's a bit of a commitment and rule of life and liturgy. Well, not liturgy, it's a Quaker group, but we meet for worship online. We're meeting together. But one of the issues is about this question of meeting together, because property is a pain. And if you try and take even a big place for a weekend with a large group of people, that is very expensive. There are very few of these places now. So I think some of the things are possible to do in a dispersed way, but it's when you want to bring people together that you hit the difficulties, finding a place to do so. And we can't all, I live in Eccles, which is full of multi-storey blocks of flats and loads of people. You cannot all go and visit Wales. And even just trying to get people together in Salford of journeys of more than 3 miles involves transport, and that can be tricky. So it's this question of how you get people together and why, when somehow that is so important.
Yeah, and we haven't really discussed the place of the virtual, the electronic community, have we, in this? Audrey, is that your hand? Yeah, do you want to unmute and tell us something?
I think that the dispersed community has to come first, because well, as Sandra was just saying, so many people, it would be a luxury, a very great luxury, to be able to go off and live in a physical community, and to find ways of making it more accessible is an enormous thing, and you've got to have the will, you've got to have a united vision of doing that, and so you've got to build that up. I think through in this our day and age, we can do that through online stuff, and communications generally are so much better. But so many people cannot travel. They can't afford to. They can't. There isn't the travel networks to go to retreats, to even have a short experience of community life.
So perhaps I can put that to Alan and Jonathan. How as people who've invested a lot of your lives in physical community, how do you look at the very I feel what Audrey's saying, that actually there is a matter of justice in allowing people to connect with each other virtually, because that's often all that people can afford to do, as well as being actually more equitable and less environmentally consuming, if you like. But how do you feel about the virtual alternative, you two?
Well, I mean, like most of us, I'm probably doing quite a lot of online calls. It's a necessary and valuable element of life these days. And I have to say that for me, it really leaves me missing the value of face-to-face community. I do take your point, Audrey and Sandra. My belief is that, if we really want to get to somewhere like a retreat place for a few days in a year, if that's a priority, then many of us can make it happen. And I mean, in terms of how we imagine this centre in Wales being funded, it's a bit of a Robin Hood approach. So we imagine making quite good revenue from a number of groups that can afford to pay for the place. And we certainly want to make it as financially accessible as we possibly can. And bear in mind that you know, one of the great things about growing your own food is it's actually, you know, you're contributing to the cost of being in a place, as well as actually developing community. And to me, growing food is very much a spiritual practice.
Yeah, I guess there's never going to be an easy answer to it. And thank you, Alan. That's you know, it's one solution for people who have one particular set of circumstances for whom it's relevant, isn't it? Do you want to come in, Jonathan, or no obligation? Do not to freeze you out.
Just to say, if people are able to come to a place like Hilfield or Pilsdon or Findhorn, or be part of something like the Nazareth community somebody spoke of, it can provide a lot of, you know, visits real. And I'd always go for the, you know, we're Christians are people of the incarnation. I'd go for, you know, bodily presence every time. But yeah, places, you know, we've got people who come to Hilfield don't pay anything because we, you know, we never ask for a fee. It's always a donation. And if, you know, the people who can't pay are subsidized by those who can. And it's but that kind of inspiration can be what, you know, keeps going or awakens something in other people. There have been plenty of people who've come to Pilsdon, come to Hilfield, who've gone on and started their own communities or changed the way they live. Yeah.
I guess, well, let's begin to wrap up. I mean, there's a couple of issues that are areas I would like to explore. I particularly appreciated the comment from Ginny's group about the kind of community that we're talking about. I'm paraphrasing here, Ginny, but it was about community being a kind of bulwark against, well, you know, let's call it fascism, really, which we're seeing on the rise. Individualism, insularity, yeah, a rejection of people who are different. That there's a whole load to explore there. Jane Bartlett, thank you for that. I'm not quite sure how it would work, but I find appealing the idea, as you do, of intentional communities embedded in a local church community. So there's something about borrowing a bit of the kind of physical nature of a local congregation and its property, if you like, its stability, even if there's a kind of virtual thing going on around it. That's just a couple of examples of things that we won't have time now, sadly, to explore. But can we just could I just ask for another few minutes of your time, because I know Alan and maybe Jonathan and certainly Barbara and I have a couple of things to share. Alan, do you want to go first? As this was all kicked off and inspired by your article, really.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I really resonated with what Jane said about intentional communities embedded in a local church community, and that's one of the versions of what I was talking about of becoming a leaven for your local community. There's some quite innovative work going on fairly near me in Herefordshire, Peter Church, if anyone knows it. The Anglican minister there has been very innovative in creating a sort of modern day pilgrimage route, and also in getting grants to convert his main church in Peter Church to a community hub. And yeah, there are quite, I think, relatively simple things that can be done which make a church a much more inclusive hub for a community than just, you know, a place that has a couple of services a week. I think the only other thing I want to put in this point, Paul, is I'll put in the chat the website for the project and also my email address. And if anyone would like to be kept informed or interested in exploring getting involved, then please get in touch. Sorry, one more thing. I mean, what really sparked this for me was some research done by the Climate Psychology Alliance and others about young people's view of the climate crisis and of their view of the future. This was among 10,000 people in countries across the world, developed and less economically developed countries. And in all of these countries, over 70% of these young people felt a sense of despair about the future, but also over 70% of them felt that older adults were indifferent to their situation. And that sense of indifference was what really got me moving with this project. So the other thing I want to put in here is that the way we're constructing this project, we really want to make it as affordable as possible for young people. And, you know, if you know young people who might be interested, we're actually running a pilot program designed by young people, run by young people in September of this year in Wales, where we are heavily subsidising the price to make it accessible to young people. Anyway, I've really enjoyed the chance to share the exploration. As I said, I'll put some information in the chat. Thanks.
Yes, please do. Thanks very much. Yeah. Jonathan, anything you'd like to come back tell us about?
So yeah, just to say, I put it in the chat. I think it's hillfield.org, which will tell you about Hilfield. Do come and visit or look at us online. And then if you want to ever interested in my book, there we are. It's in the chat as well.
What's the title there?
Called Accompaniment, Community and Nature.
Oh, right. Thank you. Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Thanks then, Jonathan. Thank you both of you for coming. We won't finish just yet, but thank you for your contributions, which have really sparked a lot of discussion and debate, and no doubt people will be continuing to mull it over as we go from here. One thing I would like to highlight from Green Christian that would be an opportunity to pick up on a lot of what we've talked about tonight will be the annual members meeting. Now, Barbara probably knows a more up-to-date picture on this than I do, because I've been out of the country for the last 2 weeks. Let me just remind myself of the date. The 15th of November, Saturday the 15th of November this year. We always have an annual members meeting for Green Christian members. You don't have to be a member to attend, but it's a way of reporting and just remembering who we are as a movement. This year, the theme is resilience, building on the rock, true resilience for stormy times. And our keynote speaker is that same Rupert Reed, who founder of the Climate Majority Project, prolific author, philosopher, and one-time sort of instigator of the first days of Extinction Rebellion, amongst other things. So we're very fortunate to have him, and we will be having other speakers as well, who may be able to help from a secular perspective as well as a spiritual one, with the whole question of how churches, congregations, communities can build resilience in the local area, as an expression of faith as much as anything else. So pretty much the kind of thing that we've been talking about tonight, scaled up for facing into the deepening of the climate emergency. So that conversation this conversation will be reprised on the 15th of November. Do we have a venue yet, Barbara? Do you know?
It's either Peterborough or Reading. Right. But yes, one of the
Watch this space. It will be in person, this one. Is there anything else, Barbara, to advertise?
I'd just like to mention the next Green Christian Workshop, which is the first Wednesday in June, the 4th of June, when we have Meg O'Neill from the Climate Coalition, who will be giving us an update on the big mass lobby of Parliament, which is taking place on the, 15th July, 9th of July in London, when we're all over the country. They want about 10,000 people there, 9th of July, lobbying their MP in person. So got an update on all that's happening and how you can get involved. at our next Green Christian workshop, 4th of June. Getting my months mixed up. Sorry, Paul. Hope that was not too confusing.
Thank you. That's, if you put a link in the chat to, I think it's on the website, isn't it? So that'd be good. I think our time is over, but let me finish with thank you, Jonathan, for reminding me of R.S. Thomas's work. He's my favourite poet as well. And you're right, it was the kingdom. And I'll just read it to you because it speaks, I think, for a lot of what we've been talking about tonight. It's one of his simplest and perhaps most heartwarming poems. He's not usually known for his warming of hearts, is R.S. Thomas, but this one's a bit different. It's a long way off, but inside it there are quite different things going on. Oh, by the way, I ought to say the title is The Kingdom. The Kingdom. And that's what the it is. It's a long way off, but inside it there are quite different things going on. Festivals at which the poor man is king and the consumptive is healed. Mirrors in which the blind look at themselves and love looks at them back. And industry is for mending the bent bones and the minds fractured by life. It's a long way off, but to get there takes no time, and admission is free. If you purge yourself of desire and present yourself with your need only and the simple offering of your faith, green as a leaf. Thank you very much, everyone. It's been a very fascinating evening, and thanks again to Alan and Jonathan for your contributions. And